A visionary, a leader with an iron fist, a political street fighter, former Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew has been described as all that and more, and it is undeniable that without him, Singapore would have been very different today.
Whoever governs Singapore must have that iron in him, or give it up. This is not a game of cards. This is your life and mine. I've spent a whole lifetime building this. And as long as I'm in charge, nobody's going to knock it down.
The first 10 years after Singapore's independence was a period that saw the most rapid transformation. As Prime Minister, Mr. Lee's immediate priority was to build the economy, provide housing, healthcare and education, and create a nation. In his speech on 12 September 1965, Mr. Lee said, "Over 100 years ago, this was a mudflat, swamp. Today, this is a modern city. 10 years from now, this will be a metropolis. Never fear." Mr. Lee courted multinational investors to upgrade Singapore's economy from mass manufacturing to high-tech industry and build the region's finest infrastructure, including a world-class airport, shipping port, roads and communication networks. He established a public housing system, the Central Provident Fund, a savings pool for citizens, and developed a comprehensive health and education program. To build up the nation's defense, Mr. Lee established an armed forces and instituted compulsory national service in 1967, a conscription program for male citizens when they reached the age of 18. Mr. Lee envisioned that a clean and green Singapore would carry a competitive advantage, and what followed was the launch of a tree planting campaign to green the city. Today, Singapore is an internationally known garden city, clean and teeming with greenery. The infrastructure was built. Next was to get Singaporeans to change their habits to reflect the changing society. Uniting the different ethnic communities was a major concern. In 1965, a Constitutional Commission on Minority Rights was set up to safeguard Singapore's racial and religious harmony. Schools were integrated to allow students from different ethnic backgrounds to learn together, and an ethnic integration policy for public housing was later implemented to promote racial integration. In 1966, Mr. Lee introduced the Bilingual Policy, promoting English as the common language among the different ethnic groups. English would be the first language and medium of instruction in schools, and students are required to take a mother tongue in one of the 3 official languages, Chinese, Malay or Tamil. Mr. Lee discouraged the use of Chinese dialects by promoting Mandarin as the mother tongue of ethnic Chinese. In 1968, Mr. Lee launched one of the first nationwide public education programs, the Keep Singapore Clean campaign, to address the problem of littering. Fines of $500 were imposed. Worried that a growing population might overwhelm the developing economy, Mr. Lee started a vigorous Stop at 2 family planning campaign in 1969 to persuade parents to stop at 2 children. The campaign was extremely successful. Other campaigns followed over the years, from saving water to no smoking, being courteous and speaking Mandarin. In 1983, Mr. Lee sparked the Great Marriage Debate when he encouraged Singapore men to marry women with high education due to the large number of women graduates who were unmarried. This led to the founding of the Social Development Unit, a matchmaking agency set up to promote socializing among men and women graduates. Mr. Lee also introduced incentives such as tax rebates, schooling and housing priorities for graduate mothers with 3 or 4 children, in a reversal of the Stop at 2 family planning campaign in the 60s and 70s. These incentives were later extended to all married women to increase Singapore's falling birth rate. Mr. Lee had a tough stance against corruption. He introduced legislation to strengthen the Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau and later proposed that the salaries of ministers and top civil servants should be linked to that of top professionals in the private sector to maintain a clean and honest government. Mr. Lee was a firm believer in meritocracy. In his memoirs From Third World to First, Mr. Lee said he aimed to create a fair society, not a welfare society, and chose to redistribute wealth by asset enhancement, not by subsidies for consumption. Mr. Lee stressed that Singapore was not a welfare state where anyone was entitled to free services, and everyone had to play a part to ensure progress for themselves and their families.
We never went for the iron rice bowl. Each person has his own porcelain rice bowl, and if you break it, it's your bad luck. And they look after it when it is their own and is porcelain.
In just under a generation, Singapore has transformed into what Mr. Lee described as a first world oasis in a third world region. After leading the PAP in 7 victorious elections, Mr. Lee stepped down on 26 November 1990 and handed over to Mr. Goh Chok Tong. Mr. Lee remained in cabinet as senior minister, a role he described as advisory. On 12 August 2004, Mr. Lee's eldest son Lee Hsien Loong became the next Prime Minister. Mr. Goh became Senior Minister and Mr. Lee assumed a new position of Minister Mentor, a post he held for 7 years before stepping down in May 2011. Mr. Lee spent 52 years in Cabinet and is the world's longest-serving Prime Minister. Singapore's success story is closely linked to the leadership of Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. With over half a century in government, his legacy is one that will be remembered in the hearts of Singaporeans.